The phone rang at 2:14 inches the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way men my age do, not from worry, just from the particular cruelty of getting older, where your body decides sleep is optional, somewhere around 63. I was staring at the ceiling fan, counting the rotations, when my cell lit up on the nightstand. My granddaughter's name. Lily never called me at night. She texted, the way her generation does, little bursts of words with no punctuation that I'd squint at and try to decode. An actual phone call from her at this hour meant something was wrong. I picked up before the second ring. Grandpa. Her voice was barely above a whisper, thin and tight, like she was trying to make herself small even through the phone. Grandpa, I'm at Riverside General. Stepmom brought me in. She said I fell down the stairs, but I didn't fall. She pushed me, and my shoulder hurt so bad, and Dad's not answering, and I don't know what to do. I was already sitting up. My feet were already on the floor. Lily. I kept my voice level, calm, the way I learned to do 40 years ago when I worked dispatch and every panicked voice on the other end needed to hear something steady. I'm coming. What floor? What wing? Emergency. The woman at the desk said pediatric emergency. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't hang up. Grandpa. Sandra is right outside the curtain. She keeps looking in. Then just listen to my voice. Don't say anything. I'm getting my keys right now. I drove through empty streets with the phone on speaker on the passenger seat, talking to her softly about nothing, about the tomatoes I was growing on the back porch, about the old dog who slept at the foot of my bed. Anything to keep her tethered to something calm while I pushed the speed limit every mile of that drive. I want to tell you something before I go any further. Lily is 15 years old. She has her mother's dark eyes and her late grandmother's stubborn streak, and she has never in her life been what anyone would call dramatic. She is the kind of girl who breaks her arm at soccer practice and apologizes for crying about it. She once sat through a wasp sting without making a sound because she didn't want to interrupt her father's phone call. When Lily tells you something hurts, it hurts. When Lily tells you she didn't fall, she didn't fall. I pulled into the emergency parking lot and was through the sliding doors before I'd properly registered that I was still wearing my pajama shirt. The woman behind the intake desk looked up at me and I said, "My granddaughter, Lily Harmon." She called me. The woman checked her screen. "Sir, the patient's guardian is already—" "I understand that," I said, as politely as I have ever said anything in my life. "I'm her grandfather. Her father is my son. Please, just tell me where she is." There was a pause. Then she told me. Pediatric Bay 4 had a curtain half drawn, and I could see Sandra standing just outside it with her arms crossed, wearing a gray cardigan over her pajamas, her hair in a braid. She was 41 years old, my son's wife of 3 years, and the way she was standing there, not worried, not crying, not doing any of the things a concerned parent does in an emergency room at 2 in the morning, made something go cold in my chest. She saw me, and her expression shifted, not to relief, to something more careful. "Frank," she said, using my name the way she always did, clipped and slightly tired, like I was a piece of furniture she kept having to move around. "You didn't need to come all the way out here. It's just a minor injury." "Where's my son?" "Business trip. Denver. I already called him. He's flying back in the morning." "Why didn't he call me?" She blinked. I told him I had it handled. I looked at her for one more second, and then I stepped past her and pulled the curtain. Lily was sitting up on the exam table in a hospital gown, her right arm in a temporary sling, her face pale in the fluorescent light. When she saw me, she made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was very small, a child's sound, the kind that comes out when you have been holding everything in, and the one safe person finally walks into the room. I crossed to her and put my hand on her hair and said, "I've got you. You're all right." "I didn't fall," she whispered into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "I know." A nurse came in about 10 minutes later, followed by a young doctor, Dr. Okafor, according to her badge, who had the efficient, no-nonsense manner of someone who had been awake since yesterday and was doing her job anyway. She looked at me, and I explained who I was, and she nodded in the way medical people nod when they're processing information and deciding how much to say. She examined Lily's shoulder with careful hands, asking her questions in that calm, clinical way. "Does this hurt? What about here?" on a scale of 1 to 10, while Lily answered and winced and tried not to cry. Sandra stood at the edge of the curtain with her arms still crossed. When Dr. Okafor finished the examination, she said she wanted to get some imaging done, and she asked Sandra and me to step outside for a moment. We stood in the corridor, and Sandra immediately said, "She's clumsy. She's always been clumsy. The stairs in the house are hardwood, and she was wearing socks, and she just—" "Mrs. Harmon," the doctor said, and her voice was very even. "Can you describe exactly how the fall happened? What time, which stairs, which direction she was going?" Sandra described it. I listened to every word. I listened to the way she didn't hesitate, and the way the details came out smooth and already shaped, the way a story sounds when it's been prepared rather than remembered. Dr. Okafor listened without expression, and then she said she'd let us know when the imaging was done, and she walked back through the curtain. Sandra looked at me. "You're making this into something it isn't." I didn't say anything. I had learned, over 63 years, that the most powerful thing a person can sometimes do is simply stay quiet. The imaging took 40 minutes. I sat with Lily while she waited, and when Sandra came in to wait with us, Lily went very still in a particular way. Not rigid, not dramatic, just a kind of careful stillness that I recognized because I'd seen it before, in different contexts, years ago, and it always meant the same thing. A person making themselves as small and unobtrusive as possible so that they don't trigger something. I kept talking to Lily. I told her about a fishing trip I'd been planning. I asked her about the book she was reading. I asked about her friend Maya, who she'd mentioned last month. And slowly, the stillness in her softened. When Dr. Okafor came back, she asked Sandra to wait outside, and she sat down across from Lily and me on a rolling stool. "Lily," she said, "I want to talk to you about what the imaging shows. Is that okay?" Lily nodded. "You have what's called a posterior shoulder dislocation. It's a specific type of injury." The doctor paused. "Lily, this kind of injury is pretty unusual. It doesn't typically happen from a fall on a staircase. Can you tell me again how you hurt your shoulder?" Lily looked at me. I gave her the smallest nod I could. She took a breath. She grabbed me from behind, both hands, and she yanked me back, and then pushed me. I hit the wall first and then went down on my side. Dr. Okafor did not visibly react. She asked several more careful questions. Had this happened before? Were there any other injuries? Did she feel safe at home? And she listened to every answer. And when she was done, she said she would be right back. She wasn't gone long. When she returned, she had another woman with her, who introduced herself as a hospital social worker named Miss Terrell. It was 3:45 in the morning by this point. Lily had her good hand wrapped around mine. Sandra was still somewhere on the other side of the curtain, and I could hear her, at some point, making a phone call in a low voice, though I couldn't make out the words. "Miss." Terrell was kind and thorough, and she asked Lily questions that Lily answered in a steady voice that I was quietly in awe of, because she was 15 years old and sitting in an emergency room in the middle of the night, and she told the truth anyway. Every word of it. I'm telling you what I know for certain. My granddaughter told the truth. At some point, the doctor came and spoke to Sandra, and I could hear Sandra's voice rise and then come back down, controlled and tight. A few minutes later, she appeared at the curtain and said, with that careful neutrality, that she was stepping out to make some calls, and she'd be back. She didn't come back that night. What I know about Sandra, what I had allowed myself not to fully look at until that night, I will try to tell you clearly. My son, Daniel, met her 4 years ago. He was 44, recently divorced from Lily's mother, an amicable split. One of those slow, kind uncouplings that leave two people better as co-parents than as spouses, and he was lonely in the specific way that hard-working, capable men sometimes get lonely, quietly, and without realizing how much. Sandra was smart and put together, and she paid attention to him in a way that he found difficult to resist. I had dinner with her 3 times before the wedding, and I told myself that the thing I sometimes noticed, a way she had of editing Daniel's sentences mid-conversation, of deciding what topics were worth pursuing, of steering away from subjects she found unprofitable. I told myself that was just her personality. Decisive. Strong. Lily's mother, Claire, had tried to tell me something once, about 8 months before this night. We were at Lily's soccer game, and she said, quietly, that Lily came home from her father's house, sometimes seeming different, not herself, quiet in a way she wasn't otherwise. I had asked Daniel about it, and he said Claire was still adjusting to the new dynamic and everything was fine. I believed him. I chose to believe him. That's something I have to live with. After Miss Terrell finished with Lily, she came and sat with me in the corridor and explained what the next steps looked like. The hospital was required, legally required. She made this clear to make a report to Child Protective Services. This would happen regardless of anything else. A physician who observes an injury pattern inconsistent with the reported mechanism of injury is a mandatory reporter under state law. This was not optional. It was not a question of what Sandra said or what I said or what anyone believed. The process had its own momentum now. I nodded. I thanked her. Then I called my son. It was 4 a.m. in Denver. He answered on the second ring, groggy, and then instantly alert when he heard my voice. I told him everything I knew. I told him carefully and completely, and I did not soften it. There was a long silence on his end. "Dad," he said finally. "I know," I said. "Is she?" "She's okay. She's safe. She's asking for you." I heard him moving, heard what I thought was a zipper on a bag. "I'm getting on the first flight. I'll stay with her until you get here." Another silence, longer this time. "I didn't know," he said, and his voice was something I hadn't heard from my son since he was a boy. "I know you didn't," I said. "Come home." I won't pretend that what came after was simple. It wasn't. The CPS investigation took weeks. There were interviews and documentation and a process that moved at its own speed and didn't care how urgently any of us needed answers. Sandra retained an attorney within 24 hours. She was cooperative in the particular way that people are cooperative when they have legal counsel, measured, careful, never quite admitting anything. But here is what investigators found, piece by piece, in the weeks that followed. Lily's pediatrician had notes in her file going back 14 months, 2 visits for injuries that had been explained as sports-related, a mention in the doctor's notes of Lily seeming somewhat flat and withdrawn during a well visit. Nothing individually alarming, but together, reviewed in sequence, they told a different story. A teacher at Lily's school, her English teacher, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, came forward during the investigation to say that Lily had shown up to class twice with bruises she'd explained as soccer injuries, but that Mrs. Patterson had noticed they were on Lily's upper arms, not the places you'd typically see soccer injuries, and that Lily had seemed anxious when she noticed the teacher looking. There was a neighbor who had heard shouting from the house one evening, a woman's voice, not angry exactly, more contemptuous, and the neighbor had thought it was a marriage argument and hadn't thought of it again until the investigation. And there were texts. On Lily's phone, texts between Lily and her friend Maya going back almost a year. I didn't read them myself, they were part of the investigation, but Daniel told me about them afterward, in the halting, careful way he was speaking about everything in that period. Lily had told Maya things she hadn't told anyone else. Not in dramatic terms. In the quiet, matter-of-fact way that kids sometimes report terrible things, like they're not sure if what's happening to them actually counts as terrible. It counted. Sandra was charged. I won't give you a legal commentary on exactly what happened because I'm not qualified to, and because the process is still, in some ways, not finished. What I can tell you is that she did not remain in my son's house, and she did not have access to Lily. My son filed for divorce 6 weeks after that night. He sat across from me at my kitchen table one Sunday morning, both of us with coffee getting cold in front of us, and he said, "How did I not see it?" It's a question I'd been asking myself too. I told him what I've come to believe, that certain people are very skilled at choosing targets who are not going to be believed in environments that are going to provide cover. Sandra had identified, with the accuracy of long practice, that Lily was a child whose objections could be smoothed over a stepchild, a teenager, someone whose reports could be attributed to adjustment problems or teenage moodiness or resistance to a new family structure. She had picked her moments and her methods carefully. She had been, in the clinical language I read later, a person who understood control. She had not counted on a phone call at 2:14 the morning. She had not counted on Lily being the kind of girl who, even scared and hurting, knew to call the one person she trusted. She had not counted on a doctor who looked at an injury and said, "That doesn't match the story," and kept asking. Daniel is different now. Not worse. I want to be clear about that. He is more careful, and he pays a different quality of attention to Lily than he did before. And Lily, who is resilient in ways that make me believe in something larger than myself, has been in therapy, and has her mother and has her father paying that attention, and has occasionally sat on my porch and talked to me about what she's working through. She is going to be all right. I say that not because I need it to be true, but because I have watched this girl for 15 years and I know what she's made of. There is something I want to say, because I keep thinking about the night at the hospital and about Miss Terrell, the social worker, asking Lily those questions, and about the way Lily answered them. She was afraid. She had been afraid for months, probably, carrying something that no child should carry alone. And when she finally had a space where someone official and sober was asking her to tell the truth, she told it. All of it, without embellishment and without backing down. I have been thinking about what it took to do that. 15 years old, 2:30 in the morning, exhausted and hurt, knowing that saying what she said out loud was going to break open everything she'd been living inside. And she did it anyway. Every time I think about it, I have to find something else to look at for a moment. Here is what I want anyone listening to take from this, because I have thought about how to say it, and I think this is the most useful thing. Children tell you the truth. They don't have the vocabulary for strategic lying about things like this. When a child tells you something happened, something physical, something that hurt them, the job of every adult within earshot is to believe them first and investigate second, not the other way around. And if the child in your life has been quieter lately, if they come home from somewhere and there's a stillness to them that wasn't there before, if they deflect questions and have explanations a little too ready, if they flinch at things that shouldn't provoke a flinch, pay attention to that. Ask the question more than once if you need to. And if they really answer, listen like your life depends on it, because theirs might. My son is doing well. He moved out of the house Sandra had picked out and into a smaller place, closer to Claire's house, and Lily has a key to both. She comes to see me on Sundays sometimes, and we sit on the porch, and I let her talk or not talk, depending on what she needs, and she has started asking me to teach her to garden, which is the best possible development I can imagine. She asked me once, a few weeks ago, why I came so fast that night, like it had been in question. I told her that when she was born, I held her for the first time in that hospital room, and I made her a promise in my head that I didn't say out loud because she was 3 hours old and it would have been strange. I told her I'd promise myself that whatever she needed, whenever she needed it, I would come. She thought about that for a minute. Then she said, "You should have told me. I would have liked knowing." I told her she knows now. She went back to her gardening book. The dog put his head in her lap. The afternoon sat still around us, and I thought about everything that could have gone differently about the phone calls. I could have slept through, about the questions that didn't get asked until one doctor asked them, about all the moments where the story could have calcified into the wrong version, and I sat with that for as long as I needed to, and then I put it down. She's here. She's okay. That's the only version that matters now. If you're caring for a young person and something doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. Make the call. Ask the question. Be the person who shows up at 2:14 inches the morning without hesitating. Because I promise you, there is someone waiting for exactly that.